It's taken me a long while to reconcile my feelings on Psychonauts 2, which, I'll say up front, didn't satiate me as completely as the original, but is still a powerfully compelling experience. Now, almost 20 years of anticipation after the original game failed to sell, with fans feverishly getting new players invested over the years in the hope this would increase demands for more, there's a lot riding on a sequel everybody wants to be good. Actually, more than good. So I'll understand if my take sounds a little disappointing. I do, however, hope you hear my words. The achievement that is this game's very existence is matched by an adventure that, even if I think is slightly less rounded, is also incredibly thought-provoking, deeply melancholy, exceedingly well conceptualized, and still unlike anything else out there, a masterpiece of its own. I'm feeling all sorts of emotions, lots of different thoughts racing through my mind, but even as I sort through them, I know the one thing I don't feel, on any level, is hate. I can't hate Psychonauts 2. I can't.
I need that clown makeup. I'm almost done. Kiss this piglet's behind. Push.
Especially not now. I don't think of Psychonauts as a platformer. I mean, it is. It literally is a 3D platformer, and deliberately so. The decision to create one by Tim Schafer, famed director of point-and-click adventure games and former inmate of the prison in Face Off, was pretty tactical. He'd just founded his new studio Double Fine, and cashing in on what was one of the most popular genres of the era was as much about giving the company a first project as accessible and appealing as it could be to newcomers as it was getting to develop a skill set on a type of project he'd never worked on before, which is why it felt so cutting that they were unintentionally punished for that decision. The market was changing. Microsoft chickened out of the game's advertising in favor of and Psychonauts' poor sales seemed to suggest their decision was, somehow, a mistake. To me, it was always the correct decision. It was a story about a psychic kid leaving home to discover others like himself, training at a special camp run by members of a secret organization of psychic agents, the Psychonauts. And the journey to become like these heroes he so idolized could only have been told through the shape of a 3D platformer. Being a Psychonaut, an explorer of minds, required traveling into people's psyches and battling their personal demons, understanding how folks with extreme mental health issues operate, giving form to problems that would otherwise be completely invisible. Through platforming, Psychonauts encourages physical exploration of those problems, being able to clamber around abstracted versions of a person's innermost thoughts to better understand the scope of their issues and help them, knowing that what affects in here will affect out there. It was an inspired use of the medium. And also quite funny.
Man, he's like a little bat.
Bat your head in, punk.
But it was more than a platformer. Schafer's adventure game background, a genre that has always been about getting more socially involved, had us reaching out further than a jump would allow, with dialogue trees, psychic powers, inventory items, interactions and events discoverable by doing things other than overcoming obstacle courses. The storytelling was delivered to us in how we access stuff or the way those environments were designed by the characters' worldviews, explored with all senses firing the deeper you went. There was an awful lot going on, and that could certainly seem overwhelming, yet this was never the case. I talked previously in another video about how Psychonauts was a very complex experience with so much going on, but was easy to follow because it was built on a sturdy foundation, where all the ideas and mechanics feed into a simple, consistent vision. The whacked out designs, the various abilities, the plot, the characters, all about understanding others from different walks of life, all about empathy. That extra mile made it completely unique, and I always knew that would remain evergreen enough to eventually win people over. Or you just hide it in the Humble Bundle and then it's on everyone's PC, and that's kinda genius. So it was never really a question to me that Psychonauts would come back. The pedigree and persistence of the people behind it seemed too strong to deny the possibility. It would take a while, and it certainly took effort, but I never doubted one day I'd be back in that world again.
Send in the Psychonauts.
I did, however, question what I felt Psychonauts 2 should be. And maybe that sounds like an odd thing to consider, because I imagine most people are like, hey, more of that please. But not when you've lived through the revival fever of the last decade or so. We've been through an unprecedented amount of sequel, remake, and revival projects, particularly in the realm of video games and 3D platformers. And while some have been very good, like seriously good, like one of my new favorite games ever, holy fuck, a lot of them have felt like a series of false jump starts, generating some comeback buzz, but doing their little to fulfill the promise or move anything forward after the fact. Schafer himself pitched this game as part of the 3D platformer revival zeitgeist.
What happened to 3D action-adventure platformers with stylized graphics and color and humor?
And going off some of Double Fine's more recent projects, to me the fear was, gosh, is this going to be at the expense of taking Psychonauts forward? Are we making more of the reintroduction of the genre than we are about being as wonderfully multi-layered and investable as the oddball original? Whether or not it satisfies the definition of what's expected? Well, the answer is no. It's not an issue. The game is really good. There's some instances where the corners of what it was have been massaged, and I may have some points to raise about them for good or bad, but what matters is that, at its heart, Psychonauts 2 isn't a repeat, or a retread, restart, rediscovery, none of these things. And I think it was almost disingenuous to pitch this as part of the 3D platformer's return. Psychonauts 2, for all that's changed, is simply a proper sequel to Psychonauts. The things that do and don't work for me are an unquestionable expression of what they believe should happen next. And it's choosing not to focus on that gap or the noise around it that makes it feel as fresh as before, as if no time has passed at all.
Approaching the mother lobe.
I guess it helps that very little time has passed within the game too, our first adventure having happened mere days ago. After a brief detour, Raz is now officially inside the Psychonauts base, although it's not everything he hoped.
Who are you?
I'm Raz. Rasputin? I'm, your newest Psychonaut?
How's that?
He's placed in an intern program, dismissed by his classmates, and then stuck working in the mailroom. To make matters worse, it's discovered a mole has snuck within the organization, putting the facility on lockdown and all his idols on edge, worried about rumblings of necromancy as a hidden force seeks to revive one of the Psychonauts' most feared enemies, Maligula. As the day continues, Raz begins to realize the team's history hides a terrible secret, one he's unwillingly part of, and one he has to confront to save the world before it's too late. I remember that this was the logline put forward by Tim when the game was originally confirmed, and being on board with the premise alone. A sequel should feel like an evolution of the original as much as possible, and the natural maturation from camp to work expands both the universe of the game's title as well as Raz's next challenge in personal growth. I imagine most of the people who played this as kids are in fact in those same kind of jobs as we speak. I'm not anymore, I'm here, but that's my fault, isn't it? And given no time has really passed between games, Raz comes with nearly everything he had in the original, from his perspective on the Psychonauts to the abilities he picked up on his journey to become one. It's all on tap and introduced effectively within the intro, which is such a fun showcase. I wouldn't have said Psychonauts is the easiest sell in the world outside of itself, and the intro goes out of its way to get everything across simultaneously. Simple to understand, everything introduced without feeling like it's over-explaining. And there are flying gangster teeth. Why ask for more?
I'm coming to see you, Ma!
We're easing old fans back into the world we'd come to love and letting new fans experience a tightly controlled taste of what we enjoyed in 2005, and more besides.
Why are you taking so long?
Naturally, the real point of this was to showcase not only what's the same, but what's changed, and once the intro ends, you'll have a very good idea of all the great new ways this game flows. I mean, if we're talking the basic setup of how Psychonauts plays, this is an improvement on almost every front. It's a fairly smooth experience to play through Psychonauts 2 from beginning to end. No expense has been spared in trying to create the best possible version of the original's controls, and there's an intelligence behind the way it's streamlined. Collectible placement and density is greatly improved to be an inviting activity, allowing you to enjoy the artistry on display. The less useful powers are gone. You can even choose to level up whatever individual abilities you want with points. There are replacements, natural choices that enhance the existing gameplay. I thought this one was very clever. Even if I immediately turn the sound off. Powers have enough defined limitations now without making it feel like you can't explore every nook and cranny of the game's space every way you want to. Less likely you'll be trying to sequence break, because I think they might have taken it personally when they were schooled by a teenager.
Sort of the first major public showing of how broken this game can be.
Though from what I've heard, they've done it again. I could play Psychonauts 2 all day, and it could almost fool you into feeling like it's always been like this. No point where I felt what I wanted to do conflicted with my instincts carried over from the original. I don't know that the radial system will ever be the perfect siphon for accessing those powers in an efficient way. I almost wonder if it's here more for aesthetic reasons than practical, but it does the job for what it is. Combat was never a strength of Psychonauts, and I wouldn't say this is pulling off any mad bombo combo hype or anything, but this is easily the largest tremendous leap made from the first in terms of outright quality. Very obvious they hired a specific set of people with expertise in this field to make that work this time. I'm thinking through fights and preferring different styles of attack to others, feeling pretty flexible in a pinch, not mashing a button to win. And it's not totally out of place with Raz's platforming skill set, his acrobatics flowing from one style of gameplay to the other. Enemies were, in response, also greatly improved to have distinct differences this time around, each with a specific set of tactics informed by their now much stronger designs made to fit the game's thematic principles. I wish I could have shown you my friend's reaction when he saw the enabler and bloody leapt out of his chair, inspired by the way the sensor's no was now answered by the new baddie's yes. Let's face it, it was very silly of me to have any doubts this would happen. Burn them. I've already talked about how strong Psychonauts 1's core design principles are, and they've been put to use the same way here. I don't think I need to reiterate those positives in too much detail. You can't go wrong with a well like that to draw from, and I'm pleased that it doesn't try to modernize. If anything, it goes harder on those choices wherever possible. It's still all about the 60s. 60s decor, 60s culture, 60s fashion and attitude and politics, all through a skewed art direction representing an off-balance point of view that feels totally at home with the look of the original. I think 2 even solidifies everything that's great about the franchise as its own style. Psychonauts has always put me in mind of the great tradition of American picture books and beyond, the likes of Lane Smith or Eric Carle, Sesame Street. Funny that. This stuff is art, tactile imagery that represents the melting pot of the states, a variety of less traditional surrealist techniques applied to something suburban and human and funny and appreciated from the tiniest age, art for everyone. Tim and Double Fine's work has often had that same sensibility in offering a skewed look at American culture that different ages can enjoy at different levels. I believe these continued decisions make Double Fine the video game equivalent of that cultural touchstone, with Psy 2 the latest title affirming the talent. It's important to me that the games have that tactile quality, where you can almost touch them with your eyes. There's a worry with this level of graphical fidelity that we'd overshoot what the original was trying to achieve, preserving the illustrative look of Scott C. and Co.'s art while being three-dimensional, but these guys, they know what they're doing. If anything, the better realized visuals are closer to what everyone else has pointed out, the look of stop-motion films. And what those praising this are not telling you is how appropriate that is to a world about people crafting entire universes within their minds, universes made with different materials to get across ideas that would be impossible to impress by flat text. Lots to dig into there, which, don't worry, we'll be doing that later. Maybe some things feel toned down, but I put this to a larger world being introduced, with greater focus on the key cast members' looks, the main characters getting the kind of designs we're used to seeing, some returning folks even getting sequelized outfits that better fit the more officious nature of the tale. I'd go as far as to say Raz's new outfit, making use of the reasons I liked the old one with an added on-the-job flair, is so much better. Oh, the drip. While the background fodder kind of melds together to draw less attention. Hard not to notice the backgrounds they're inhabiting though. I gotta tell you, the eye for level design is faultless. Not just the amount of detail, where they put that detail, how they divvy up the locations, or where they choose to decorate to best express an idea or a character's way of living. I could not stop looking around and admiring the top-notch craftsmanship from a studio made of bona fide artists. It's that kitchen sink philosophy I dig in all my favorite games, and one the first did so well. You take a defined space and fill it with purpose, make the best diorama you possibly can, rather than going for something big and ambitious but effectively empty. In particular, I think the hub location, the Psychonauts headquarters and surrounding area, is straight up breathtaking. I love being in these spaces as much as Whispering Rock. Doesn't feel out of step with Game 1. None of it does. It's great. It's like Psychonauts 2 was hidden in the data files of the original, like Lalo. I think the team, under the direction of Lizette Teatree Montgomery, and including a bunch of the artists from the original, has done a wonderful job in continuing the look of Psychonauts all over. This is one of those happy occasions where I can confidently say the look surpasses the first, recognizing that the tools are there not to make everything look shiny and crisp, but to build on the strengths of its existing direction. The original still has a great look thanks to its foundational principles and for the time it encapsulates, but you can see the limitations in how confused lighting acted around those complicated forms, or how textures could only be so refined to showcase those illustrative touches. We're so far ahead in what we can do now to represent those efforts at their best. A perfect example of how graphical power is nothing without great expertise behind it. And jolly jeepers, some of the stuff they can do technically, the graphical gap is nice, but the technological gap allows for some weirdness we'd never have been able to do before, things that had me balking at how much that 15-year leap has allowed them to push on the more abstract moments within the brain spaces. It's never cool for cool's sake. There's always a storytelling reason, always a need to make a certain structure or texture match the message. Moments like how the ever-interpretive chaos of the brain becomes the order of an office, then slowly descending into tooth-fixated animated nonsense. How tiny doorways seamlessly hide huge unforeseen expanses. Cake and cake and cake and cake and wait a minute, how many 90 degrees was that? I'm probably overdoing it. Only so many words to say what seems kind of obvious to you guys about the way Psychonauts 2 is well made. The art is good. The acting is good. The music is Peter McConnell, so of course it's good. It's never not good. Even Sly 4. Even Sly 4, and that's not good. I think back on how much I bellyached over the direction 3D platformers were taking visually, seeming to miss the point in how to make the best use of the tech at their disposal, points people were so ready to dismiss offhand, only to see great artists instinctually pushing past that complacency to put these principles to use, and get us better looking games, with Psychonauts 2 as kind of a pinnacle. It would be impossible to accept anything less from now on. I'm just sorry it took as long as it did. I'm even more appreciative that nothing about Psychonauts 2's polish feels derivative of other big releases. They're not out to win a popularity contest here, except maybe that one, which wouldn't matter anyway. This is a highly individualized level of artistry that can't be easily replicated. And sure, there's always room for improvement, but I don't think they should be too worried about the competition. Certainly not you, big guy.
No one's gonna notice, you guys. That happens in Ratchet & Clank all the time. All the time.
You know, we're never going to beat Titanic. Nobody can.
Okay. Tim only wants the best for his team, and I do appreciate his candor. Double Fine has been upfront about the process, and it's been fascinating to watch the game develop in those updates the past few years. Things I think they could be proud of, especially Tim. He's had to make a lot of compromises to keep his company alive, but I don't think anyone can accuse him of ever being untrue to himself, forever marching to the sound of his inner drum and ensuring that questions are always asked of every point, including his own. I remember the exact moment I knew the game was going in the right direction while watching one of the developer diaries early on.
Show you the glide, which we may not actually keep this version. He's got this sort of fun...
We might not keep any of this stuff.
Yeah. He's got like this little balloon glide now, and it's multiple.
Maybe.
I don't know. I like it. We'll see.
That told me nothing was getting rubber stamped without good reason. As you might have gathered, I lost heart during the era of the Broken Age campaign, not feeling the title lived up to Double Fine's consistently strong standards, mostly in its second half. This was a point and click made with one of the masters involved, and it came across as a placeholder stunt to get people talking, an experiment I wasn't sure was worthwhile, but I see now more than ever that it needed to happen. You have to make those moves. You have to do what isn't done to figure it out. And I think as a dry run to getting Psychonauts 2 to happen at the level of production it did, everything done was necessary. Getting them into a comfortable rhythm they definitely earned. I can't even imagine what it must feel like to finally have the sequel in their repertoire. They're even out there in the post-game updates, making the experience better and better, significant updates. That's on top of all the options to tailor things to your needs. P2 really gets the whole game thing right in a way the first maybe didn't. Forgivable enough, given the development woes and such, but understandably not an excuse to remain complacent after the fact. And they haven't. They've thought of everything. Everything. I don't think any parts of the machine feel tacked on or random. It's an evenly consistent experience where everything within it has been polished to a shine. Talking about Psychonauts as a great gaming experience is a satisfying thing. I don't think it blows my mind the way Crash 4 did about how the entire franchise could function. That was special for a fistful of other reasons. But it does show that they were already on the right track in creating something that felt like its own iconic playstyle, which could be refined and expanded on with enough time and care. It was well worth the wait to see that happen. You're not getting a half measure. The cash you're putting down is for everything promised, and I certainly felt once it finished that I was satisfied enough with just getting to take part at all. Most people are going to, and seemingly have already, take to this en masse. Can't think why anyone would be outright mad at the attention this series is finally getting for a good video game. No, fuck it. A great video game. As we all know, however, I'm always about how the gameplay and style fits the big picture concept. You know, people go out on the street and they go, oh, that B-mask is all about how the gameplay and style fits the big picture concept. Yeah, sure. Okay. And my love for the series has always revolved around how the original uses the format of a video game to convey particular ideas. And there was hope the sequel would do the same in a whole new way. Guess what? It does. Shock. One way that's helped me appreciate the qualities of Psychonauts 1 and 2 in a new light is looking at their overall shapes and realizing how they complement the chosen narratives. It's easy to get caught up in the technical details and declare one as superior through pros or cons, but I feel it's better to look at each of these and see what they're trying to say individually, and whether or not those details support the specific game in question. Doing that with both reveal incredibly strong conceptual identities, because while they might play similarly and have a lot of the same strengths in design and so on, it's the choices choices made on how they're structured that make each uniquely special in what they're trying to say. Not sure I can get across what I mean of such an intangible idea without tangible examples, so the way I've managed to make sense of this is to see them as types of puzzles. Yeah, no theme park analogies today, we're on a budget. Psychonauts 1 is like a huge jigsaw. You're given a bunch of pieces of different shapes and sizes that are put together one at a time until the larger picture is complete. The journey to that point allowing you to discover your potential as a psychonaut. While the minds you visit are largely separate from each other, the asylum inmates all coming with their own stories beyond the scope of Raz's adventure, making the game sometimes feel quite episodic rather than a connected whole, it's learning how to solve them and overcoming the game's many challenges, the buffet of new ideas and concepts it throws at you, that helps you create a fuller understanding of human behavior, creating a fuller understanding of Raz, and thereby giving you the tools to face the last person who needs help. Yourself. Psychonauts 2 is more of a Rubik's Cube. Every side has its own puzzle that has to be completed, but they're connected to form one single, much larger puzzle. Moves you make on one side inform another, and if you cross-reference each, then you start to get a better understanding of the cube as a whole and how it should fit together. It's this interlocking philosophy that makes Psychonauts 2 feel like a compact and perhaps more layered experience. The minds visited in this game are all commenting on the Psychonauts as an institution, offering different perspectives on the same characters or story beats, and understanding what one mind is saying will help when you inspect another. It's by comparing all of these interpretations as he resolves their personal issues that Raz will have a better idea of the larger problem that has to be solved, and how he can use that information to decide how he will live his life from now on. The two different puzzles answer two different questions. The first, building a picture of the Psychonauts as an ideal, and the second, resolving the Psychonauts as they truly are. Look at that, it's all peeling. It's no accident our first major stage is found within the mind of one of the more put-together commanding agents of the second generation, Hollis Forsyth, teaching Raz and the interns that being Psychonauts doesn't automatically validate every decision they make, something she even takes on board for herself. The casino hospital level she provides is cool, a combined mental map of Hollis's time as a doctor with a gambling addiction we end up causing, in a selfish, though not entirely unprovoked, attempt to make her more open to risk. But the real genius is the center of her mind's eye before that change, a hospital chapel. Within that mental church, a literal mind palace, Hollis calmly meditates on morality, what decisions have to be made to keep Psychonauts HQ running smoothly. She's practically writing her own Bible on what the organization should and shouldn't be. The two versions of that level are to set a measurement for Raz, as he, early on, messes with the balance, lectured through the gameplay on the difference between saints and sinners when it comes to psychic activity. Hollis serves as the moral baseline. She's here to sign under the original game and say, this is what being a Psychonaut should be about.
We're not here to change people's minds, Raz. Not here to fix people. We're here to help people fight their own demons. The ones they already have.
With a new outlook on morality, Raz from that point on explores the minds of the former generation of agents who founded the Psychonauts, the Psychic Six, collectively traumatized by a failed mission that, through the lens of their individual neuroses, is refracted into very unique interpretations. Compton Bull's been consumed by anxiety, creating sock puppets of his friends judging his every move on a high-pressure game show. Cassiopeia has filed away the parts of her personality she feels failed her in the past within a huge mental library. Ford Croller's fractured psyche hides the story of his past within 3 separate personalities, the standout being the depiction of his mind as a sorting office, himself a towering stoic machine trying to remember where everything's supposed to go.
This letter's got no return address. I'm afraid that means the dead letter office for you.
But wait, I'm a heartfelt love letter.
Don't care who you quoted, the feelings must get sorted.
We realize that the Psychonauts are broken at their very core, and a failure to address these issues is starting to take on a greater consequence that can be traced to a single problem. They show that being a Psychonaut is not an inherent good. In fact, their entire organization, while well-intentioned, is founded on flaws. Each level becomes a series of incredibly tight cross-references connecting the individual's personal history and then tying into the rest of the game's story, some things only making sense on a second playthrough. Memory vaults will still contain backstories for what a person went through as before, but now many of their contents are explicitly stated by the game several times elsewhere, and while I wondered if this made them feel less intrinsically valuable, every version of a story was always missing at least one detail found in another, like you're experiencing a person's thoughts swirling around their mind at different points of lucidity. It became a good incentive to root around the brains on repeat playthroughs, and you'll see how many gaps are catered for as you start casually snooping. You may even get spooked.
Nah, oh, sounds serious.
A cynical part of me saw the repeated use of characters across the brains early on and thought perhaps this was an efficient cost-cutting measure when compared to the huge scope of people, real and imagined, we come across in the original. But it became gradually obvious how it's 100% justified by the game's narrative in a subtly effective way. Schafer has gone on record saying that the games loosely adopt different psychological theories, the first leaning into the works of Freud, and the second the works of Jung.
So there'll be no blaming Mother today.
There's crossover between both, so it's not a hard and fast rule that dictates either game shape, and I can't speak for all the specifics, but, man, how did Roof put it? Well, Freud's take on the mind is like sitting on top of a big multi-tank engine fueled by different urges, while Jung is like being in a car with a bunch of different people who'll offer different readings on everything that just happened. I think that attributes the difference between the two games very well, the first dealing more with an abstraction of primal desires, while the second is more literal with how we perceive ourselves within the collective, making this use of repetition and connection officially the better way to showcase that difference. A few of Jung's theories are discussed through the game's use of repeated character interpretations, like seeing funhouse mirror versions of all these people and asking you to decipher how they extrapolate from the true image. These apply to those without and within, quite openly delving into Jung's belief in archetypes, that we all contain universal personas applied to different aspects of our lives, or used to interpret others in relation to ourselves.
The hero, the explorer, the shadow.
These projections become the figures met within a level, from the NPCs to the now much improved boss fights. Better than before, not simply because they're technically well put together, but because they matter to what is being expressed through this theory. That even those projections representing others somehow, underneath, originate solely from that person's viewpoint, and therefore are beings they have more power over than they realize. Quite a masterful way to take an existing psychological train of thought to tighten the conceptual identity of the series, though I don't feel Psy 1 and Psy 2 are competing in their intentions. If we didn't have the first, we wouldn't be able to paint from its palette to create the second, and the wild separation of minds in the first is as much a relevant flavour to what it wants to say as the sequel's tightly collective trauma, all under the umbrella of how Psychonauts usually does business.
Reflecting on your humiliating loss?
Not right now, please. I'm scolding my inner child.
It's certainly a funny game, but the jokes this time around take a back seat in a manner entirely appropriate to the subject matter at hand. Even those jokes are somewhat barbed this time. There's a sad commonality here different to the inmates, whereby the 6 outwardly function well enough to live, sorta, but not to have a life, internally finding themselves in great distress. A more relatable presentation of common cases of mental illness I think many players will respond to. I've already seen widespread agreement that the depiction of Bob Zanotto's addiction is particularly accurate. He sees himself as marooned on an island, unable to make his plants put down roots and grow, his memories buried at the bottom of a bottle. His friends and family are on faraway islands, denying they would ever want to see him again. A moth with a child's voice insists that he will protect Bob by taking seeds away that could grow into new plants. Snatches of Drunken Sailor play intermittently, and sometimes the sound of low bowing drifts into what, against the endless tides of water, almost sounds like weeping. Perhaps it's worrying so many of you understood this. I know I did. Emotions have been turned into textures we can see and feel and almost taste, things the original certainly managed, but not to this effect, and that's really sent home by the game's midpoint through Helmut Fullbear. Helmut is a synesthesiast, someone whose neural pathways overlap so they can, for example, see what they smell and taste what they hear, but due to prior events is currently a brain in a jar. As his mind slowly wakes, it unfurls in the style of another 60s pull, the psychedelia of Yellow Submarine, an absolutely ingenious move. It's certainly the closest comparison to the legendary Milkman conspiracy. Both are highly intense, experimental stages exploring the minds of complex individuals suffering from quite powerful maladies, but at completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and one that separate the strengths of both games. The Milkman conspiracy is a labyrinthian nightmare, a cacophony of noise where we're tasked with finding order within the chaos. Psy King Sensorium, on the other hand, also unlike his husband's level, is a wondrous tapestry where everything exists in harmony, where our job is to actually build from nothingness to a point of complexity. And the bop, man, the bop! The depiction of the Psychic Six is, for me, the most successful part of the game. A very intricately thought out vision for how their mindscapes get the player to feel the breadth of their friendship and the history of the Psychonauts without having lived it. The great irony of all these different viewpoints being that they show their unbreakable compatibility. You can see how what's missing in one mind is offered by another, a lot of emphasis placed on the relationships forged between them, and doing what the first game did best, making you understand a group of strangers by visiting their thoughts. Perhaps that's what makes the lack of visitation to Otto Mentalis' mind so jarring, but even this is clearly a stylistic choice. Every Reddit thread imaginable has commented on his presence in the game, always shown as separate from the others in a number of different ways, and it's no secret he's set up as a possible suspect for an antagonist. That this doesn't come to anything doesn't feel like a missing piece. If that were so, I think people would feel more conflicted on this interpretation, or say that other players were just looking too deeply into it. There's too many consistent clues for it to be insignificant.
What you thinking about?
Oh, nothing. I just post like this so people think I'm smart and thinking all the time. I'm a little fool of myself.
Not visiting his mind only ends up making him stand out in his own special way. Another part of the puzzle. This interlocking approach to designing the levels told through the story of the Six is what makes the key mystery, the truth about their enemy Maligula, so effective. And it does feel like it pulls the truth out from under the original game to deliver a satisfying reveal concerning Raz and Ford Cruller. In many respects, this is Ford's story, the truth of his splintered mind, told over 5 different pieces, extrapolating on a series of events he feels totally responsible for. I think all fans will feel very positive about how this deals with that character, and you'll come to appreciate and question him in ways that don't conflict with who you thought he was before. I did go back to Psychonauts 1, initially wondering if Cruller's personality and situation didn't quite line up, but no, was pleased to realize how it came together when doubling back and having the full story in my head to compare it with. I mean, struth. There's quite a bit of history in the first game and its original design documents that line up now. Who knew all that unrealized potential would finally be completed to make the first feel even richer than it already was?
Gives this valley an interesting history.
It's funny, I really think David Kaye's performance as Clank has been watered down over the years, but his take on Ford in 2 is phenomenal. Set the tone for everything else to follow perfectly, and it's his reactions that haunt me the most.
She just wanted to help, but they pushed it too far. How should we have known? It's not like she was marked fragile. But I thought I knew her and everything she held inside herself. I had so much to learn. I guess some packages are better left unopened.
The overall vision of the game's shape is beautifully crafted, and the best part is how it's designed to impact Raz, who discovers that his heroes aren't perfect, that he was almost preordained to reach this point, and not in the way he wanted, that it might not be so bad to just be a part of the world, rather than at its center. I think it complements and confronts the hilarious cocksure nature he had in the original pretty well. It's not a failing of the original that had to be corrected, it makes the first retroactively funnier knowing how little he really knew, even though his heart was in the right place and that he was willing to measure up to the role.
You said that if Benita performed, everything would be okay.
Okay, so I left out the part about the deadly phantom. I thought you'd chicken out.
Ma'am, I'm a psychonaut.
2 validates that as the baseline attitude that shifts into him accepting the role of a support worker, still facing the trauma plaguing the Psychonauts, but letting them be the ones to confront and resolve it, offering hope that players facing these issues can one day do the same. See, if Raz contains multitudes that can be separately useful, then clearly that must be true of others. I think the moment that touched me above all was the way this was resolved with the archetype's biggest proponent. The metaphor chosen to do so, saying it out loud's only going to take the power away. Hopefully you feel the same as I do. That's the real effect the Rubik's Cube offers in showcasing the Jungian strength of human connection, that every side has to be counted as one in order to unlock the game's overall thesis as it coalesces. Look, we could use a lot of big words, but you get the picture. When it comes to getting its point across, it's very, very good. As an abstract notion of being a fabled long-time sequel, 2 is everything it needs to be. Its dressing is phenomenal, its depth is evident, it's filled with details that explore its central themes in ways that push the concept forward. It's exactly where I wanted things to go. To a point. This is obviously me setting up for a segue to talk about some of the things that didn't entirely work for me, which in this case isn't really about things I thought were bad. I mostly found myself picking up on aspects that didn't quite make the game feel as realized within its own shape as the original, and though most make sense to me looking at the game on its own terms, they still bothered me. More than I thought they might. My biggest concern was that it didn't feel quite as out of the box as the original. Psychonauts 2 is imaginative, there's a lot of brilliant ideas on display, but few mindscapes stood out to me from a mechanical standpoint. The original had an evolving cube, a functional dysfunctional neighborhood, a tiny city to stomp in, a revolving theater with an evolving script, a giant board game, a series of intricate backstreets with magic paintings, high-concept puzzles that made each stage memorable. P2 starts strong with the casino hospital stage's sideshow activities, but afterwards it gets a bit thin on the ground. The focus sticking mostly to straightforward platforming broken up by combat. There are exceptions, but they don't last long. The major mechanical standout was actually taken wholesale from Asif Siddiqui's Amnesia Fortnite project, The Gods Must Be Hungry. A fun concept developed within the company walls he was entirely happy to let be a part of the game, kind of a testament to the company's creative flexibility as employers. But knowing that was first developed as an entirely separate project does make the lack of puzzle-solving approaches in the other stages even more noticeable. I'm not opposed to focusing on the strengths of the core platforming, that's what we're here to do, but I had hoped to be surprised with new twists on the formula level to level, things that wouldn't have been possible in the original, and it never quite happened. I thought, based on the trailer, Sensorium was going to be a musical odyssey, that the brain would open up its senses as we moved through, lights and colours appearing, the soundtrack growing. I remembered how De Blob had us bringing colour to a colourless city, the music dynamically reacting with every building we painted and growing as the city comes back to life. Sure, it's a tall order for a single level, but I thought it might be the kind of direction we were headed in. Perhaps it's my fault for seeing any press before the game, which ran with this level ad nauseum thanks to the amazing visuals. I guess I figured playing through it would give off a different reaction than looking at screenshots. This surmises my overall concern. We have a lot of extrasensory ideas, but they're not always explored in extrasensory ways. I wouldn't say I'm Hat in Time's biggest advocate, but I think they managed to find that extrasensory vein in a lot of their levels. And, you know, it's way less appropriate to do that there than it is in Psychonauts. That's the game where you need to be participating in a hybrid platformer murder mystery section in the mind of a paranoid delusional, right? Well, I think so. Part of the issue is that, while the game boasts more brains than the original, many of those stages are quick, straightforward corridors of gameplay designed to walk you through the story as it happens or to make room for the combat sections, leaving me not as excited to go back for a second go, even for completionist's sake. Linear pathways by the time you reach the asylum inmates in the original were less important than building out the intricacies of those worlds. Everyone's brain felt substantial no matter how big or small, squeezing the juice out of every mind, which isn't gone entirely. The closest we get to a classic Psychonauts level is Cassie's collection, a large world filled with lots of details and new characters to talk to, her mind a treasure trove of both classic and imaginary literary figures who make it the funniest of the set.
Why aren't you, like, dripping blood and stuff?
It happens from time to time, but I just go over to the horror books and drip on them. They like it.
Her backstory in Shanghai provides a stunning location representing both the danger of her environment and how she survived through the use of her skill sets at that time in her life. A particular favorite detail is finding the Psychic Six near the library's central ceiling, showing how they're always at the top of her mind. There's a fair few hidden tableaus like this you'll discover as you strive to collect everything. Plenty low-key details, but given how popular Mia's hidden room was, I'm surprised there's not a few more secrets as intensely realized to push those cross-references further. Perhaps the subtler approach is, in an age of things being immediately revealed online, necessary to keep people searching, but as greedy as I feel saying this, I did think there'd be more. Additionally, I have to go on record saying that the overworld was impressive until I realized it was functioning about a third under the use of the original. The larger, more detailed space feeling less well utilized in how progression through the game is structured. I'm not asking 2's overworld to have another boss fight or a brain hunt quest exploring the one unique platforming area in the game, but I didn't believe the section included in the game's first act, where we head off base to a casino, was a strong enough alternative. They'd clearly put a lot of effort into creating a great looking space, showing us the Psychonauts on the field, covering some plot details and giving us a fun and creative capper to meeting our classmates. But it mostly came across as a playable cutscene, making the game feel weirdly top-heavy, followed by nothing else to break up the pace as it sprints through the midway point, even if I enjoyed spraying the bees. There's side quests and optional activities, but, and maybe this is going to sound weird, it comes across as a bit more narratively passive. Like the original, you can talk to a lot of people, now with many more dialogue tree options, and see a couple neat events take place, with the Psychonauts, Raz's family, and the new interns hanging around in different places on the map. I've seen some debate over how people feel on the interns, and I sort of get it. Personally, I like their designs and the whole breakfast club thing they got going on, and I think there's truth to them. I feel like I've met people like this. Or maybe that's me becoming old and no longer hip to the youth, daddy-o. However, what's not as well implemented is the ability to find out more about their stories. My favourite part of replaying through 1 is tracking down each of the kids at different times and essentially unlocking optional scenes depicting whole character arcs. It endeared you to them and made the world feel reactive and alive. Everybody got something to do, even if you weren't going to be there to see it. As I said, that sort of happens here, and there's some great moments, but way less opportunities are given. Often it's you finding someone, getting offered a quick conversation or a quest, and that's kind of it. They go back to being regular NPCs fairly quickly. They don't go the extra mile the way the campers did, and I know we all love Sam, but I think her getting the lion's share of attention maybe puts a bit too much weight on that family, though not as much weight as they put on the wildlife.
Where'd you learn how to make pancakes?
Meme school.
It's a shame because I really like how they're introduced through the casino stage, and actually thought I'd missed a bunch of stuff that wasn't there. Gisu mentions how she taught Raz about grind rails.
Just remember everything I taught you about rail grinding.
And I thought, oh damn, missed that part. I gotta go back and find that conversation next time. But no, it's not there. Was that her trying to make an in-joke between herself and Raz? Like, she wanted to seem like she was in control of the situation and give a cheeky wink, or was it earnest and they cut that part? I don't know. Not a big deal, just I might have flagged that up is all. They do get buttoned into the main narrative, which is great, but I don't know if their appearance in the final battle felt as earned as the other group of people I wanted to see there. The Psychic Six, the guys I grew to love over the entire game. They get their payoff, they help us out, but them not getting to be present physically in the very last moments, well, that didn't feel quite right to me, especially in the final cutscenes. While Psychonauts 2 has cut back on so many of the frills offered in the original, it's added in its place an enormous set of main characters I'm not sure it always knows what to do with, fighting for their time in the story in a way that suggested some narrative clumsiness. As a story about Raz coming to terms with the history of the Psychonauts, it's appropriate enough that Sasha, Mia, and the coach sits the majority of this one out. They're still around, and it's cool to see how they operate within work hours, not to mention this one scene where Sasha gives Raz a sterner lecture than even Hollis after messing with her mind. That's a great comment on their relationship. Yet, this many years on, I thought we'd get more of their involvement as things progressed, instead of them mostly running in at the end of the story to remind us they exist. I suppose the trade-off was if you played Rhombus of Ruin, which I have to say is pretty darn good. The dream of spending time with the gang on an official Psychonaut mission is fulfilled in what is a solid adventure game experience with great writing and a style of its own. And VR, as it turns out, is an amazing platform for the Psychonauts, finally able to quite literally see through the eyes of others. The trouble, of course, is that, being a VR game, means as great as it is to play Rumbly and the Bumbly, the majority of you probably didn't. The affordability of the tech isn't there yet, and I had to borrow a friend's system to even get this footage, so not exactly the surefire solution for their lack of activity here, for all its character-based perks.
Fish people.
Other folks are similarly treated. I'm not sure why, but something about the way Raz's family flits in and out of the story, given how integral they are, doesn't quite figure for me. I like all of them, and we can certainly make some quality time in the side quests. You learn a lot about them if you go looking for it, but I couldn't shake that their appearances came across rushed. Never felt the promised conflict, in fact, several conflicts they were introduced under came into play within the central narrative that strongly. Honestly, I thought Frazee and Raz were going to have much more to talk about. Sick design, by the by. Same goes for Lily, though she's far from unexplored either. We go deeper into her perspective on why she seemed so over the Psychonauts in the original as she grows up a bit, entirely focused on the well-being of her father and hoping to get a chance to apologize. I thought this was a nice way to weave her into the story thematically and was glad to see her getting some stuff to do, but she still felt more tangential than was probably intended. I was so shocked, all the previews mentioning how Raz was going to realize the true meaning of girlfriend, and I wondered what that meant. In a game about upending his assumptions and learning about the pitfalls of relationships, I mean, they are 10, maybe they realize it's all kid stuff after all, but in spite of one brief argument, instead it's a repeat of the original, where she makes all the first moves and Raz buckles at the knees. It's cute, it's fun, it's, you know, been a while. This is the flip side of the feels like it was yesterday thing, because it means when a character doesn't get a satisfying payoff after 15 years, you get conniptions when people go, it's okay, we'll see them again in 3. What, will we? Will I be there? You know what really didn't pay off for me? Raz's fear of water. I think the moment we all saw Maligula in the trailers, we knew she was going to be connected to the Galokio curse, and in the game she's certainly commanding Raz's greatest fear. Of course that was going to lead to a major twist.
There is no curse?
Rasputin, there's no such thing as magical curses. Please, this is science.
Finding out it's psychosomatic is the perfect answer. Throughout the game, allusions are made in the imagery forcing Raz to confront this head-on, amazing unspoken moments where he's immersed in his fears as we build to the final confrontation, challenging his belief in this lie. Certainly, when edited together in clips here, the results look effective, but actually playing the game, I can't say I ever felt it was overcome properly. His reactions become less about that fear and more about Maligula herself, even though they clearly wanted these to be seen as one and the same. There was all this obvious stuff going on, showing how each psychic specializes in a certain ability or element and implying that Raz was going to accept his as water, in a way getting to reclaim the family name, which, as we discover in optional dialogue, was not supposed to be horribly ironic. There's even a payoff in the post-game that suggests the healing has begun. It's very nice. Yet, it didn't feel entirely earned. I felt we got so tied up in the discussion around Maligula's identity that Raz's primal response to something he'd been pathologically afraid of his whole life was buried, and the physical act of overcoming it needed to be a defining end to his arc. Naturally, friends and family would help him start that process, backing him up the way he helped them. But a fear of drowning represents him trying to avoid his preconceptions, that in truth, this is a part of who he is. Eventually, he'll have to turn it around himself and confront his own potential for evil. I had hoped for something a bit more imaginative than an attack we can't touch or a shield we can't get past. The one moment of catharsis offered echoes the ending of the first in a way that worked fine in that game, but here I thought it should have been something else. Not another kaiju parody power, but our true heritage. Can you imagine the look on Maligula's face as she strikes, only for the camera to pan around to reveal our hand of Galokio, pushing her back with the very ability she used to cause great tragedy, against the persona who, man, I'm getting pumped about this one. Tim, come on Tim, we still got time! Raz seemed to settle a little too quickly into these huge revelations, not something they didn't give reasons for, but not something I entirely bought either. The plot pushing its characters in ways I thought they'd push harder against, made Act 2 appear conveniently truncated. Even the ending, which lands on the perfect final line,
Junior Agents of the Psychonauts.
Junior? I'll take it.
felt kind of short and incomplete and oh, it's the end now, okay, bye. Yes, there's a post-game and there's great stuff in there too, but the original's final cutscene felt like it breathed more comfortably, covering important ground over the core narrative at a pace that felt correct, and I'm not sure the same is true here. Thing is, it's not unlikely this was thought about.
Gonna look fighting Maligula without my battle bot, cheapskates.
Lots of early teaser images for the game put a focus on the current set of Psychonauts and their involvement in the plot. Looks like they may even have been taking the gang to a certain old country for Act 2, potentially a sharper split between the acts than what we got by finishing up at Green Needle Gulch. The original pitch talks about the improper siphoning of funds to necromancy in Truman's absence, of a whole cult of delusionaries hiding in the base.
Second in command has been making some changes at headquarters, including redirecting funds away from traditional Psychonauts business and peacekeeping to more fringe endeavors like the discredited practice of necromancy.
I imagine it was always a lie, and I like that a lot, but if you've been following as long as I have, it's hard not to wonder how many iterations of the story there had been, and if any shifted, what remains. This is, after all, a tale where the Psychonauts are broken, and we know Mia and Sasha were supporting Ford after his exile, that Hollis hasn't been told the full truth, and I figured a corrupted organization might outright turn on Raz and the second generation, forcing them together as outsiders to reunite the six and uncover the truth, maybe even running back into the arms of his family for a slightly more explorative beat, applying some extra narrative emphasis to the Psychonauts as a whole, redefining themselves between their past and their future. And of course, the physical undercurrent of this should be Raz overcoming his own personal fear once and for all, the metaphor that would underpin everything. And maybe it's Lily who, spurred by the fear of losing her dad, angrily brings him out of it, changes their dynamic. There we go, up the narrative steps. Nothing I'd want to change as much as I'd want to add, but like, who am I to make these literary demands? Shakespeare? No, he's busy right now.
Forsooth, etc.
Oh, wow. You really talk that way.
No, I just like to give the fans what they want.
I know. You got to appraise this for what it is, and not what it isn't. Making games is hard, okay? You're lucky enough if half your ideas get in the way you want, and if I was in their position, I'd probably be making the exact same calls. The adventure game stuff is largely gone because this needs to be a consistent 3D platformer people will actually finish. The original is a cult classic for a reason. Not everybody connected with it, and some people still claim it's an out-of-touch relic. I think this time around, any similar complaints are dealt with, successfully done while, as I talked about way earlier, not losing its identity or moving backwards. A lack of major extrasensory set pieces, well, I get the sense the psychic powers are now doing most of the heavy lifting in that department. A consistent set of extrasensory tools designed to get the most out of interacting with each brain. The level of extra content, how awful must it feel to make stuff nobody's going to see? I was still finding new stuff in my latest playthrough after 15 years, which is whack, right? There's still loads in here for your average player. The story hits everything well enough that most people won't ask too many questions. And who am I to say what was and wasn't sacrificed to get the game out in the most complete possible state? Those all-important bosses were very much not in the potential release build of the game for a long time. Not until the studio was, ironically enough, reunited with Microsoft in a buyout. I think it's hard not to be grateful for them wanting to put in the extra time with that help, given how incomplete the game would have felt without them. And, it's not like they weren't trying to give me what I wanted anyway. Finding Helmet's brain within a list of backer brains was supposed to be an in-depth puzzle, obviously didn't work out. Hey, maybe people would have hated that. Stuff that's cut is not evidence of something better existing. I value the priorities that they clearly valued to get this thing finished. I haven't forgotten about the pandemic, nor the admirable resistance to putting the team through crunch. It's a heck of a thing they've pulled off. Who knows what else they've had to deal with. Look guys, the Lily plotline's fine. Now help me stop this jump button turning Raz into a dog. It's not unfinished or a hatchet job, it's great. Like, you gotta understand the bar in my mind, okay? Because there's Psychonauts, and then everything else. Psychonauts 2 does all it has to. Most people are going to play this and get what they need. So this is where I hold my hands up and say, yes, because I still love the original game, it's difficult for me to sit in the camp of, but this is way better. One is something I'm biased towards because it's like a pattern on my soul. If it were just nostalgia talking, I'd say so. But plenty of other experiences have disappointed on a revisit, while Psychonauts 1 gets stronger for me every passing year. The things people now seem to dislike, the telltale signs of adventure games past, exploring the minds of very colourful characters, even through some slightly looser morals. Look, forgive him, please. Kids were kidnapped. We didn't have time to ask.
Now we're talking.
I don't think. It's everything I'm into. Living in these wild worlds of wonder with their own little ecosystems of this funny little game.
I saw Nils peeking into a hole in the girl's cabin. I'm hiding.
2 is out to achieve something different, and I think it does so. It's operating on a different, stronger level than the original, and if there is some kind of objective barometer out there, overall, yes, I'd say it's the better game. But I didn't always feel it reached the amazing heights it set for itself as completely as the first did for its own. And, in becoming more tightly controlled, it's now ever so slightly less like the weird niche thing that appeals to me specifically. This, if you haven't decided for yourself yet, is quite obviously a me problem. Nothing is technically wrong here. It's like dating an amazing person who you like a lot but don't fall in love with. It's not you, it's me, it's definitely me. It's always me.
Flirt!
Now, I want to talk about the game's final chunk and where it's left me in great detail, so if you still haven't finished it, now's your chance. While the most important stuff I think I have to offer is in this section, I'm not sure you want this to be the first time you see any of what's coming. The third act of Psychonauts 2 is a dramatic powder keg that blows the doors off the central mystery while revealing the game's thematic heart as it pertains to everything else we've been through. The outcomes are powerful, but I don't know that I agreed with what it inferred my response should be. And I stress this isn't a negative. No, seriously, it's been hell trying to articulate my stance on where the game leaves me, but there's too much to say for me to leave this on the cutting room floor. I gotta do it. We're about to get into stuff that involves knowing a fair bit about the game's revelations, so let's ease off and start with a quick recap.
Except Maligula?
Yes. As your grandmother.
No!
Maligula is revealed to be Raz's grandmother, Morona. In actual fact, his great-aunt. In actual fact, the secret 7th member of the original Psychonauts, Lucretia Mux. We piece together the story of who this really was. How a woman dangerously experimenting with her latent abilities left the team to save her country, Grulovia, and how she was manipulated into becoming a violent enforcer for its royal family. The final straw, where a dispassionate Tsar instructed her to subdue peaceful protesters led by her sister, came when she accidentally killed them. Her inconsolable grief at her sister's death warping her into a supervillain, and the Psychic Six found themselves facing their friend in a traumatic battle that they thought led to her death. Her once-boyfriend Ford Cruller instead secretly whisked her to safety, found her sister's now orphaned son, Raz's father, and altered their memories to create a new family, before rupturing his own mind. His last effort to salvage something from a terrible situation. With me so far? we ain't done. The identity of the mole and their motive slowly becomes clear as this story unfolds. Someone wanting to turn Nona back into Maligula and take revenge on the Psychonauts for her defeat years ago. Clues, red herrings, and odd behavior is strewn throughout the story effectively, and while one of the suspects I chose was correct, it wasn't for the reasons I landed on. It's a thrilling moment as we literally peek behind the curtain to reveal the face of the culprit, done in a way that's funny, scary, and weird all at once.
Make room for Zazarovich Crystal Malik, future Tsar of Grilovia.
Nick Johnsmith, aka Crystal Malik, the last heir to the Grilovian throne, working to revive its best weapon, reveals his master plan to us from within his mind. And it's pure B-mask. Bristol, a total narcissist, a spoiled child bitter at losing his perfect world, has mentally rebuilt it as the only thing it could possibly be, a juvenile monument to his ego, a theme park ride. Yeah, earlier, I lied. The dioramas depicting his version of reality say plenty. How our preconceptions of life from an isolated upbringing or pervasive propaganda can become a truth even the most mundane mind will make into something dangerous, and we're forced to sit through it on a one-track system with our arms and legs inside it all. Well, no, that would be almost too cruel. This is slightly lampshaded by how many of the other minds have also been linear paths through a set of dioramas, but I think it still has the desired impact. And personally speaking, I got more than a few Monkey Island 2 vibes, always a plus. Crystal's an excellent antagonist, someone you love to hate, and the way his mind weaponizes his trauma in such an eerily detached way is wonderfully achieved throughout. I love this twist, and I love where it's coming from. The Maliks and their story are, I believe, allegories for the attitudes of a variety of figures living and dead, but they most obviously parallel the real-life family of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Nicholas was the inheritor of a country pressed through years of oligarchic rule. It was inevitable the populace would eventually oppose the regime, and Nick was the last straw. He was a poor leader living in decadent luxury, while Russia suffered, and his complacency led to atrocious conditions for his people, as well as the senseless murders of those looking for his support. Justice was more than called for as he was held to reforms, while Lenin rose to socialist power. There's much debate around the Tsar's true nature, most agreeing he was a spineless figure, as reluctant to rule as he was to concede, spending his energies on family life, including his son, a sufferer of haemophilia who could seemingly be healed by a mysterious monk called Rasputin, a guy Russia distrusted due to various rumors and a Boney M classic. After choosing to get involved with World War I, where he made things even worse, Nicholas abdicated, living a comfortable life with his family under the thumb of the Bolsheviks until, fearing royalists would free them and jeopardize the hard-fought New Order, they were executed and disposed of. Any of this starting to sound familiar to some of you? Maybe. Perhaps the most famous Romanov story is the persistent rumor that one of them escaped. Youngest daughter Anastasia, the subject of an Ingrid Bergman picture and the more historically recent Don Bluth animated musical, wherein Anna has amnesia and Rasputin is an immortal sorcerer who whipped people into a frenzy to storm the Winter Palace with the help of demons. Oh dear. As a story long criticized for its inaccuracies and pro-Tsarist slant, I believe, though I can't speak directly for this, Psychonauts 2 is an attempt to address this exact take, to the point where the escaping Zazarovich is the villain and the sinister advisor to the throne is the amnesiac victim. I don't know this was always the plan, but it sure smells like it could have been.
My name
starts with a D.
Is Rasputin.
As the period where Russia tipped to the USSR, it's right at home with the developing Cold War subtext of Psychonauts, putting the story on a global scale and bringing Raz's heritage into the natural mix. The parallels drawn, the mistrust of psychics stemming from his own family, tying his thematic arc in learning humility with the character who, for all intents and purposes, he could become, neither perpetrator is on the side of the angels, and we have to live with that guilt, that our love is built on the replacement of someone truly noble. When I spoke of how good the Psychic Six's narrative is, it's topped perfectly by the way it's created to support Nona's story. And you know, I actually think it's enhanced by the myth. The transfer of suffering to another wronged party. It's kind of beautiful. It's all kinds of beautiful. As Crystal's level continued, I couldn't help but think of the family's real fate. I actively anticipated this would be dealt with. For simplicity's sake, it's not. Here, the family escapes from their mistake with little consequence to live in continued luxury. Ultimately, this implication is for the greater good. It satisfies the redemption of Maligula as well as the technicals that allow her to return. We put focus purely on healing her and remembering the plight of the innocents drowned by Theodore's manipulation. Gristle works as a two-dimensional monster regardless, because he shouldn't know any better, his Peter Pan syndrome holding on fast to a false view. Hollis's warning becomes a real scenario where we establish that sometimes not all minds can be changed, an angle that hasn't been offered in the series before, achieved here with chilling effect.
Crystal Malik was their voice. Grulovia, Grulovia, his father was a dope.
That both Maligula and he reject the Tsar by the tale's end is quite something, obliterating him from reality by excising his memory, even as his impact lingers on. I'd be lying, though, if I didn't mention my reservations on that choice.
I don't want to think about that family anymore.
Me either.
Suffering in exile. Ha!
Now, I'm not here to defend the rights of the long-dead Romanovs. There's an effort to canonize them as martyrs as we speak, and I'm not going into my opinion of that, or their silly hats. But this seemed out of step for Psychonauts. Psychonauts has always been about coming to terms with what causes great evil and humanizing it. We've gone into the minds of child nappers, warmongers, mass murderers, and discovered what drove them to become monstrous, revealing both sides of the coin to make them aware of their evil. Here, in our failure to help Gristle, it's used to underline the evil of people getting away with their crimes whose real-life counterparts were brutally murdered. Thing is, I get it. You don't want to create undue sympathy for the Tsar over the people and validate any aspect of a continued Tsarist regime. This has already happened. Yet I got the impression we avoided the inconvenient truth of their counterparts' fate to better establish cardboard despots you'd never feel challenged about the way you do with Maligula, when it's the Romanovs' equally human failings that make the story ripe for adaptation. This is not to exonerate Nicholas, but to recognize the nuance of his delusions and the consequences they wrought. First the people, and then his own family, which would be seen as emblematic of what would follow. It's a much bigger conversation than the scope of this story probably allows. Plenty truths are captured here, and I get this is kind of the point. You can't fix it. But showing their fate doesn't take away from what led here. In fact, it makes it a clearer cautionary tale about ignoring the collective we can all learn from. If anything would explore that nuance, it'd be Psychonauts. I don't think the best answer when it's this close to compare is to omit the greatest consequence, assert Gristle's exaggerating the family's fate multiple times, and then have Raz say,
I wonder where Gristle went. Hopefully rethinking his version of history? That's giving him a lot of credit.
All I could think was, well, this isn't the real history, and in a story telling us to beware of falsehoods, it's odd not to see that truth. Maybe it was a bit arbitrary to draw the line at exploring that complexity, given the other crimes we've pardoned. As if we're undermining the entire point of the series to say certain people can't be helped and will never truly suffer, when in the end, they did. It doesn't sit quite right with me. But this is if that's what's being said, because these aren't the Romanovs. Grulovia is not Russia. They at least had the decency to change the names and ditch the singing bugs. I'm not offering any of this as real criticism. I've legitimately struggled to voice this thought because I really like what it's doing, which within the fiction is justified responsibly enough.
I need to run some experiments on him.
You mean tests, Sasha?
Oh, yes, therapeutic test. Mostly harmless.
You can absolutely still read what I've said isn't there into the work if you're less pedantically inclined. As I said, Nick, as a two-dimensional product of his parents' sins, works whatever the truth is. Unchecked mental health issues insulated by wealth and power. And we're definitely offering him a kindness as a prisoner, given that, if our math is right, he and Maligula are still enemies of the state. He's offered enough olive branches.
If Maligula was a monster, and if my father hired a monster...
Yes?
Then why didn't the people overthrow my stupid father and make me Tsar as I rightly deserved?
The door is left open as to how he might change too. The message here is clearly about the effects of propaganda being a tool as powerful as any psychic ability. And given those who have attempted to use the Romanov deaths as a way to leverage their own autocracy, there's an accuracy to the conversation here relevant to all of us, and indeed to Russia at large. I was aware of someone from the region on the team, Anna Kipnis, and was curious if she contributed to any of this, having talked about her early childhood in the USSR and even making a super funny game pitch based on its past.
The game will have you making decisions to industrialize, censor the press, execute ministers you mistrust, and of course, see to you and yours. It's a political satire inspired by Dr. Strangelove.
That sounds dope. Could this be where 3 is going? Hopping through the minds of shifty world leaders desperate to gain ownership of psychic powers from the one guy willing to sell it to them. Right, Tim, when do we start? Oh, okay, that's a good idea actually. This is the fun of Psychonauts. How broadly it plays with caricatured history to make these interesting dual-purposed points it wouldn't be able to otherwise. They're not one-to-one for a reason. Lucretia Mott, Lucy's namesake, was a pacifist who fought for the rights of women and slaves to be seen as equal causes. Rasputin was also murdered after many assassination attempts by royalists. That's kinda reversed here. Gristle doesn't have haemophilia. There's no descendant of Napoleon called Fred. Oh. I appreciate adapting the history and its politics in a way that's simplified but doesn't lack depth. Best serving Nona's story, the part of the game that surpassed my expectations the most. And for what it's worth, nobody's saying the conversation's over, especially not for Raz. They're smarter than that.
People are complicated, kid. You're too young to get it.
Of course, me being me, this wasn't quite the antidote I'd been looking for. To boil it down, I think, viewed as a broad commentary or self-contained story, it's excellent. But as a direct comment on the history it was closest to, it gets messy. And that was difficult for me to get past. Not that I can pretend there is any politically airtight way for me to argue why. I know I'm not batting for a morally clear-cut pitch, and I'll admit to even seeing some good in far more egregious works like Anastasia, from the firm point of view that the Romanovs had to go away. In their final days, the last Tsar and his family believed they would be liberated, as they sewed jewelry into their undergarments. It was never going to end well, but I did think, in a way the series had always managed, that kind of foolish self-destruction and its consequences would be explored as something none of us are above falling prey to, that we should all beware, no matter how right we think we are, of experiencing such delusions.
Why did you do it?
We were scared. I believed we were doing what was right. I was wrong. We thought we knew our way in life, but in death, we are lost.
Though it's kind of saying this anyway. Herein lies my real conflict on this point. I'm not sure what I took away. The things I like most about the game's thematics are just me, or the intended message. The game very obviously talks throughout about recognizing the darkness that lives within us all, the flaws we let take control when things don't work out the way we wanted, things we can, hopefully, take responsibility for. Hollis gives an excellent speech at the end about what this story's outward theme is supposed to be: second chances.
There are flaws in our most venerated institutions, in our heroes, and in ourselves. We all make mistakes, but we all deserve a second chance.
It's a great summation of the story I entirely support, but it seemed as though there was more to say. A smaller part of a much grander message the entire game had been pushing, if not outwardly connecting. Yes, it's about accepting those flaws, but it's also about how we process those flaws, which is why Raz's observations about Gristle presented without comparison or challenge threw me. Because Gristle Malik isn't the only one experiencing delusions. So is Raz.
What are you doing, weirdo?
I can't stop thinking about it. His expectations of becoming a psychonaut, formed by a lifetime of comics, are shattered as he discovers first the reality of the job, and then the reality of its troubled history. The Psychic Six are each living in their own distorted version of reality, building false images of the truth to protect themselves. The attempt to suppress a single event has become a buffer of lies built within the layers of the organization and preventing its second generation from enacting change, allowing their enemies to infiltrate and grow in power from within. The event was even the basis for Raz's entire upbringing, creating the belief that his father was trying to kill him, and sending him to the person responsible, not because he was a great psychonaut, but because Lucretia saw a way back. There's a great power in showing the history of delusion Raz has inherited and how a lie spiraled out of control. The mental image of his circus past was, even without the meat, an oppressively frightening place made to cause him pain, while Nona's is a flea circus, a cheap distraction to keep her occupied. One of those bits of symbolism that put a chill down my spine while making me laugh. Again, very Psychonauts. It seems as though this false reality is a sick joke that should be rejected for what it's done to this family, but moving past that, he sees something else, something that hit me like a ton of bricks. Nona found a way beyond this fantasy to create her own. The memories of her new life with her fake family formed by a personality beyond Lucretia or Maligula. Her mind an utterly beautiful landscape woven out of soft, pastel cloth. A dreamlike, nostalgic paradise. A literal fabrication. Raz, like Nick, lives a life built on delusions. Ones that dominate the makeup of who he is, whether he wants to accept it or not. He could easily become like him in how he views the truth of the Psychonauts and what they've done to his family, after believing for years it was the other way around, that they were the persecutors and not the persecuted. And discovering the truth could mean that his fantasy of what the Psychonauts are could be discarded forever. Who wants to be that hero when they've done such terrible things? Here, however, it is not the basis of great evil. Raz's life and his attempt to be an ideal Psychonaut has brought great good to the world and improved the lives of others. He's made real connections, his family's bond is strong. He's shone a light on people's problems and shown them how they can be managed, things he could never have done had he not been a part of this story. He's even done what Nick couldn't, bring the dead back to life and letting them and their loved ones find resolution. Raz's life was made for him, but it's real, and it mattered. And Nona is as valid a person as Lucretia. We don't have to undo that just because it isn't the whole truth. I don't know if you've been picking up what I've been throwing down this entire video, but I think this is all about something else. Less about our capacity for good and evil, and more about reality versus fantasy. About taking control. Everyone in Psychonauts is living their own quilted experience. A tour of any mind reveals entire universes spun from threads of truth, lies, and everything in between. People telling themselves whatever they have to in order to make sense of their lives. Many have taken them too far and become trapped by those views, but they equally show what makes those people special and how their different beliefs can be used to improve the world. That our existence as a collective is how we support others to become their individual best. This accommodates the idea of second chances, but what are you going to do with that second chance? How are we going to turn the reality of something bad into something ideal? By doing the work, getting help, helping others, taking control. What exists up here is so powerful, and it's easy to fall back on our fantasies when things go wrong, to reject reality, but reality doesn't have to define you. It's only the way it is because of us. You can write the ending you want to be a part of if you recognize what's possible, and it's a point of view I never would have considered were it not for this one conversation after the game was finished.
Well, memories are stories we tell ourselves about where we come from. It's how we figure out who we are. And the story I've been telling myself all my life is a lie.
What are you gonna do now?
I think I'm going to let this whole mess simmer for a bit in the back of my mind while I focus on making some new stories for the family.
Okay. I'll leave you alone.
I never mind talking to you, son. We psychics understand each other, right?
I've missed Augustus. A lot. You would have to be aggressively cynical to deny what they've done. I might be very wrong about its intentions, but I don't think it matters. I think the game will have a powerful effect on everyone and create a multitude of responses, like any great art, and we have a game that offers support on a level so far from being glib lip service. This goes beyond mental health, it's what everyone's going through. We get one life with one view of reality we cobble together from our experiences, and we think we have to go through it alone. But we don't. Hollis was right, it's not about fixing people, but sharing our view with others shows something I think she silently gets, that we don't know what we don't know. Forcing someone to believe what you want is a foolish, even dangerous goal, but speaking your truth, sharing your beliefs, and making others aware of your experience can build bridges to change we never would have dreamed could help us, giving us the chance to reshape our understanding of reality and defy the rigidity of life as presented to us, how we provide the tools for others to heal and take back control of their narrative. What life is, and what we want it to be, can coexist. All it takes is some thought. I don't know if it's apparent to you how much I like Psychonauts 2, because I do. I really, really do. I can tell this was made with incredible enthusiasm, breaking the mold for revival platformers, providing a sequel not only worthy of the original, but worthy in its own right, one that deserves all the attention and praise it gets, many calling it their game of 2021. I'm short of taking the same position, not, oddly enough, because I don't think it's the best of that year. It's, hard to explain. While there is something of a disconnect that prevents me from loving it the way I love the original, it's not a negative to me. That comes across as the game having done its job. I've seen many reviewers and journalists speak of this with a level of enthusiasm I'm not sure is inherent within the game's message. If anything, I'm walking away with so much to think over, asking questions about my own response and the burden the title now carries. Obviously, some of this was me processing my more pointed issues. I was trying hard to sort between what I felt was to its benefit and what I simply disagreed with, and truth be told, I haven't finished that yet. I likely never will. I suppose part of the conflict is that, after 3 games and 15 years, I still feel like I'm on the outside looking in, keen to explore further into this wonderful world and set of characters they've created, and we all know the saying about a good thing. Perhaps some straightening out of a few plottings, improved emphasis on certain thematic through lines, and some additional out-of-the-box touches might have been all it needed to get me singing its praises and nothing else, but who's to say I'd even have felt that differently with those included? It wouldn't have been what I went through and raised all the thoughts I have now. I don't know that I want that to be the case. Yeah, there's things I'd do differently, but I'm not frustrated or mad or angry. Psychonauts 1 is everything I ever wanted, and 2, well, 2 might just be one of my new favorite games ever. See, this is a much less controversial video than you thought. I'm sorry for putting you through that. Perhaps in talking about the conflict of reality and fantasy, I'm projecting my own struggle here, one I suppose has subconsciously been in the making since 2005. Psychonauts 2 has been a fantasy for so long, and coming to terms with it being done, no take-backsies, is frankly a bizarre thing. It's impossible to describe the accuracy of my feelings in any real way. And hey, maybe that I make videos on these subjects I'm invested in as soon as the games come out, maybe that factors in too. The weight of my judgment is going to be assessed outside of me. That's scarier than you know. But that's what the story's about, right? I have to be responsible. Have to recognize the impact of what I feel in the context of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that this is an experience I'll never forget that has people falling for the series in a way they never did before. The wrong that was the original's lack of voice has been righted by a deserving successor which could only exist because of the first. We now have 2 amazing games. 2! And people are as into them as much as I am. I can't hate that. Hell, I love it. Thank you everyone for watching this incredibly long Psychonauts review, analysis, breakdown, whatever you want to call it. It's just a weird little piece. Took me forever to put this together, really difficult to word. Hopefully you understand why, having now watched it. I have to thank my patrons again, you know, sticking by so that this could happen. It's a real big undertaking, and I wanted to do this game the justice I think discussing it deserves. So, thanks. Feel free to check out my other stuff if you enjoyed this or found it interesting. And I guess I'll catch you guys in the next video. So thank you very much. Goodbye. So, where's Mikhail from again?
In Russia, bear's much smaller.
Oh, bugger.